How is everybody? I see there's a crowd there that's actually using this for napping purposes. That's also good. But it's great to be here. My name is Mantas. I run the high potential client acceleration program for Google in a few markets. Lithuania is also included, so I guess that's why that activity was mentioned. And today I really wanted to talk about how to switch slides when they don't switch. Here we go. Which is, too many spoilers. So here we go. Today my presentation is about exponential organizations, or the new type of exponential organizations. Some of you might be familiar with the topic and heard it somewhere. So I'll try to briefly familiarize those who are not familiar with what that concept is. But for those who are familiar with the concept, I will try to go through some of the observations that we are seeing that's happening in the startup field, organizational design. And since probably my presentation is in between the pitches, maybe that's a bit of a few new aspects for the investors and for you guys to think about when you are observing startups and trying to evaluate them. Now, I wanted to start with the metaphor, makes things easier probably to grasp. And this rocket or startup being a rocket metaphor is quite common, so I decided to use it. But when you think about rockets and launching rockets, right, and if you assume the startup is the spaceship you're building, there are a few other aspects outside of it that are important, right? So on one side, you have to get the conditions right. You have to find the environment, the weather conditions where your rocket will fly without problems. And you need to get there at the right time. The other thing that's important is to have fuel, right? It's important to actually have something to lift it up. And obviously, you need a launch pad, right? Rockets don't launch like cars just being on the street. They fly much faster, so they need different infrastructure. Now, you can link that to the concepts that are familiar, essentially, in the startup world, right? So the conditions can probably be seen as market, and this is why it's a very common topic of finding the product market fit, right? Finding the right environment for your startup to grow and the right audience to reach out to. Fuel is obviously investment. Now, this is something that's always talked to, so I'm not going to touch too much about it. But I think something that's really infrequently touched upon is partnerships. And I guess there's one key thing that I'll probably go over and over again through. And this is also a key characteristic of these new type of organizations, that given the current business environment, and I'm going to tell you why that is the case, these new organizations are really, really good at leveraging partnerships to be leaner and grow faster, right? So I even dare to put a definition, totally made up by me, so trust it or not, your choice. But again, new exponential organizations, I believe, are those that are able to identify what to concentrate on, really, really double down their efforts in those areas, and outsource everything else or do everything else through the partnerships. Now, I'll try to guide you through this concept and discussion in 3 steps. So the first step is probably a bit of my background and where I'm coming from. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about what we do within the SEED program and actually why that relates to these broader trends that are happening probably globally. Then I want to touch upon the concept of exponential organizations, as promised, cover both the whole concept and also where it's going. And also talk a bit more about the world, the broad thing, right? But to give you a bit of understanding why there's certain context that kind of pushes companies to act in a certain way. So let's start with the SEED program. Now, SEED program, as I mentioned, is essentially focused on finding the most potential businesses, most potential startups or technology platforms in the region and helping them to build the right base for growth, right? Why we do that? We notice that if we build the right base, if we help companies to build the right base, they tend to grow faster, right? They tend to be more successful with us. And also at the stage when we transition work in a more formal way with them, we don't have to solve legacy problems. And solving legacy problems is hard. That's why we try to go a few steps back in order to avoid them. Now, we do that in 3 ways, right? Because we see that they are essentially the key pillars that we are leveraging and using to build the space. So one is having the market insights and business planning right? If your business model doesn't scale, although it works in a small realm, right? That becomes very programmatic when you in the growth stage. The other thing, obviously, picking the right markets, deciding where to go and how to build your business strategy for every market individually, that's very hard. And us being a global partner helps companies to get those answers. The other big pillar is measurement and analytics. Now, you probably know that all technology businesses are all about data, right? The better you're able to work with data, there's a higher chance they're going to be successful. So getting that right is important. We do a lot of work around that. And obviously, the last aspect is very straightforward. Google product advice, obviously, by being the source of the tools, we know a bunch of hacks and strategies that can help companies, gain competitive advantage by just doing and using tools better. Now, I think the more interesting aspect of the seed program, what we do is essentially the outcome that we are seeing, right? So this is something that drives me a lot. And here on the slides, which are there, you can see a real case, right? So it's a graph that's showing online sales through our channels over time. And this is the company that we worked with, and you can see that we started working here, the end result was here, right? But it took some time to work through those aspects that I mentioned to unlock that growth, right? And in this particular case, there was a lot of things that we brought to the table that essentially helped them to solve these problems. And these cases of 34x are rare, right? So aiming for 10x is already big, but this case was the 34x. But I think there are 2 takeaways from here. One is that it was not immediate, right? You needed to solve for things, build the right base. And the other thing was that once the right base was built, the acceleration was very fast, right? And mutually beneficial. So I think that kind of showcases this principle on how new exponential organizations can use or partner with the established exponential organizations to drive mutual growth. And yes, this is just a small example from my personal experience, but I think it shows a bigger trend that's going on in the industry. Across many different fields. Now, before going into those specific examples, I want to touch upon the whole concept. I believe that there's somebody in the audience that is not that familiar with the concept. But this concept is, I think, very important to understand if you work in the technology field, if you're building a startup, right? And this concept actually is not new. It's probably 3 to 4 years old. It was introduced by Salim Ismail, who is one of the key people in Singularity University in California. And he used this concept to understand and to explain the organizations that essentially had 10 times or higher impact than their peers because they used data-driven techniques, right? So it's said that there is now a new breed of organizations that are just doing things in a data-driven way, in a better way, and that's why they can grow faster than traditional companies, right? So if you look at the biggest companies, right, the most successful companies right now in the technology field, they all are really, really good at doing this, right? So if you look at Facebook, we don't think a lot of times about the core aspect of what we do, but they use this exponential technology to make communication and global connectivity extremely cheap, right? And this cheap aspect is very important because before you were able to connect with friends in different countries, message them, it was just crazy expensive, right? So Facebook reduced the entry barriers here and the cost to this. Amazon, obviously, they're very good at, having a lot of selection in their stores. So again, they're using that technology to make very wide scale and large inventory possible and accessible for people across many different countries. And Google obviously is known for doing the same thing with information, right? So before finding information, discovering it was extremely difficult. And the company was able to use these exponential technologies and exponential ways of thinking to make that universal and accessible to everybody. Now, I think there is another interesting concept that is mentioned in this book, and I do recommend for everybody to at least have a glimpse into that book. His, at the very end, argument is that the companies that are essentially has got these frameworks or techniques they're also turning into being more of a platforms for the new companies to be built on, right? And these new companies that are built on those platforms, they're fundamentally different. And he even argued that they're better. If you look at Google's particular example, that kind of tends to hold truth. So Google started obviously in 1998 as a search engine. What the innovation was at that time that there was loads of information coming online, but there was nobody who could categorize it and make it accessible. So Google was really good at that and obviously built an amazing business out of it. Now, if you look at Google right now, you're probably familiar. There are many big products that we've got. There are many new products that are essentially growing, and they're growing again by leveraging same techniques that were true from the very beginning. Now, I think the more unusual angle, or the angle that people don't really take, is the developers angle, right? Or the startups angle to Google. So all these products that are mentioned here, they are tools that developers and companies use to grow their business, right? And yes, not all of them have got billions of users, but there are some of them that has got platforms that have got billions of users built on them, right? So, and the other important thing is that it covers the whole cycle, right? So there are development tools, there are growth tools, that there are monetization tools. So that kind of suggests that that company, or Google in this particular example, and you can probably map out Amazon in the same way, is not really anymore just a consumer facing or consumer product company. There is another aspect of, you know, having these developer tools and developer platform, or the company that you can essentially build your growth on aspect. So if that holds true, right, and if these companies are turning more into platforms or essentially have got this platform functionality, then probably we should be seeing the new type of companies coming out of that, right? Because the different environment, different ways of building companies should lead us to different type of companies, right, that we hope are better. So I think a good example, and a lot of people, again, don't think about Pokemon Go in this way, so that's obviously the artificial reality, augmented reality game that was very popular, I think just last summer or a couple of years ago. Now, if we look at the pace of their growth, right, and try to put numbers on it, I think it looks even more astonishing that the whole buzz that was created around it. So on the left, you can see the graph that shows, that compares Pokemon Go daily active users in the first week after launch to Twitter's, right? So Twitter, the Exponential organization, and look at Pokemon Go nearly reaching the same stage in less than a week, right? And this is unheard of growth. There's something that's going on that allows this growth, because this has never happened before, right? And then suddenly the company comes up and showcases these results. On the right-hand side, you can see their monetization, right? So they were also the company that was extremely fast, in this case, at reaching 500 million revenue run rate, right? And if you compare that with other games, so they were 3 times faster than Candy Crush, which was hugely popular and hugely viral, and they were nearly 7 times faster than other popular titles, right? So they did something very different, and again, that kind of allowed them to grow that fast. And this is revealed, I think, when we look at the, so this is a graph from our cloud team, and it showcases how the cloud platform was essentially utilized, right? And how the growth compared to their projections. So Pokemon Go was totally built on Google Cloud, so essentially the existing infrastructure. And the 2 dotted lines show the realistic scenario that they had, and then their most, well, in this case, from data perspective and from infrastructure perspective, pessimistic scenario, right? So you can see that the growth was much, much bigger. Like if they would have built their business in the standard way, on cloud infrastructure that was not essentially tested to handle the scale, the game would have crashed in the next couple of days after starting, right? And the momentum would have been lost. So I think this fact that they were building on something that's already can handle that scale has defined their success. And in this case, you know, like you cannot predict 50 times scenario of your worst case scenario, right? This is something that you cannot just predict. And I think there are many cases like that that you can find not only in a cloud perspective or infrastructure perspective, right? So again, looking from Google's perspective, you can find similar aspects in Facebook or Amazon. You can see that there are these solutions, essentially the platforms that can handle scale, that can allow you to do a lot of stuff that you would otherwise be doing by yourself in a partnership way, all right? And that is true across infrastructure, data management, user acquisition, user monetization, so all the key pillars. On the other aspect, I think also important to stress that, just like Launchpad, having just the physical infrastructure is not enough. You need to have service, that kind of supports and helps you to use it. So a lot of times, I think startups, when I work with them, they don't research the service offerings of different companies, right? And again, in Google, you have the business strategy, product advice, localization, vendor access, all these offerings that allows you to concentrate on the key things that matter and leave the rest for the partners. And in this way, be much faster, right? Be like Pokemon Go. Drive your business in a much faster way than the companies that were already seen as being extremely fast and growing extremely fast. Now, probably the question is, why is it now, right? Because back in the days, well, cloud infrastructure existed for some time. There were other companies that were doing, again, business in various ways. But why the time right now is the time where I think partnerships are extremely important? The first aspect, I believe, is that the world has changed. Now, the world that the current big technology companies were built on was fundamentally different from the world that we are living right now. And I think one important aspect of this is that scale means a totally different thing right now. So back in 2007, and that's when the iPhone was invented, right? So that's what started the mobile revolution. There are only 1.2 billion users globally, right? Right now, there's 3.6. In 10 years, it's projected to reach 5 billion. So scaling up, right, has got a totally different potential audience to reach. And again, managing that scale is a totally different game than managing scale back in the days when the digital revolution essentially started. The other thing I believe from this graph that's important is that the platforms are very different, right? And that also defines the ways on how you do business. 2007 world was desktop first with iPhone, and the mobile revolution has turned into mobile first, right? And now we're seeing that it's turning into AI first, right? So if the whole paradigm, how businesses are built, how they're monetized, and what impact they can make is changing, right? You cannot think about business in the same way. And I think to a lot of these questions, partnership is a great solution. The other thing is that the technology itself has changed. Now, in probably 90s, you could create your own website, right? We're having a bit of knowledge on how essentially program a website. But it was a very simple, relatively simple technological solution. Now, if you want to build a solution that is mobile, fast, adaptive to different contexts, right? You cannot build everything yourself, right? In the same way, if you want to reach the users on mobile, you cannot do everything themselves, right? So again, if you look at this aspect, both the world and both the technology, right, that means that you probably be doing things differently than Google or Amazon or Facebook did back in the days. And the last aspect, I think it's extremely important, heavily not noticed by a lot of startups, is that the expectations of users have changed drastically. So what this shows is probability of bounce from your website, depending on how fast it loads, right? So we have from 1 second to 10 seconds, and you can see that the probability increases drastically. So people are not patient anymore if the websites don't work, right? If your solutions are not fast, you're going to lose your users. So again, if you are building your business back in the days where people were used to dealing with bad technology, with slowly loading websites, and it was fine because that was part of the game. That's not part of the game anymore. You need to be good straight away, right? Otherwise, probably you won't succeed that fast. So there is a very good saying, and I have a way of rephrasing it, but I wanted to say the original one first as well. That David Rose, author and investor, he said that the company is referring to more traditional companies, that any companies that were designed for success in the 20th century, they're doomed to failure in the 21st century. Now, I think we're living in the phase of accelerating change, and probably we can claim that any company that was designed for success in the previous decade, unless it changes and changes fast, is doomed to failure in the next decade, right? So again, that kind of emphasizes that the world has changed, right? You need to think about differently. So what? I guess it's always this very philosophical question at the end that matters. I think there are three implications for everybody who wants to create a startup or runs a startup, right? Apart of the fact that you probably need to talk to others and care about partnerships more, is that on one side, we're seeing that there are lower barriers to global opportunity, right? Think about how hard it was 10 or 20 years ago to reach global audience and how easy it is now. The difference is that you have to be much better to do that successfully, right? But the whole fact that you can do that in a much more accessible way already creates a very good opportunity. Now, there is also an important fact that actually you can build organization in a much leaner way. So if, for example, Google had to build their own cloud infrastructure, servers, a lot of stuff themselves, right? You don't need to do that anymore, because there are now these global platforms or global payments that are built for you to build on, right? And in this way, you can really focus on what matters to you. Take Snapchat, for example. Everybody's surprised why they were able to release features that fast. Well, that's precisely why, because they have outsourced most of the stuff, a part of focusing on really understanding their users and building new experiences for them, right? And that's why they were so fast, because they were just doing something that they were really good at. And the other aspect, I think, these companies that are essentially platforms, right, whether it's from the service or technical perspective, they're more ready than ever to actually support the growth, right? We run a startup program. There are a bunch of other startup programs that are run that you can tap into, right? And just not considering that does not make any sense, right? Because there is definitely value that can be brought in. So I think there's three things that I really wanted to summarize this presentation in, but there's one big conclusion, right? And that kind of refers to the first aspect that I mentioned, is that you really, really have to think on how you can concentrate on your key assets, right? Be really good there and try to build the rest through partnerships, because that's the only way to move fast, also in a very qualitative way, in the world that's changing at a crazy pace, and that also, although it's got a bigger opportunity, but this also has got much more complexity than it had. So that's my takeaway point. Thank you. I think we still have, 8 minutes for questions. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Fantastic. There's a beer waiting for me, so I'll get going there. Thank you.
No. I still have a question for you.
There's always that guy, right?
Yes, that's me. So you have said many insightful things. Yeah. So in the light of that being said, I have to ask you: have you actually played Pokemon Go?
I have, yes.
Do you need a hug? I'm really sorry, man.
I don't need a hug, but I appreciate your.
If you ever need to talk to someone, so. I'll be there for you.
I'll definitely come to you.
Okay.
That was the only thing that was missing.
That's a deal. That's
exactly.
a deal.
Great.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.